are talking Bigfoot. You might be saying, "Oh, why you won't talk Bigfoot? Why you not talking about the Dogman?" I'm gonna tell you why we're not talking about the Dogman, because y'all have seen the videos I've done. But we had all the videos of Dogman, and we got these other weird things in the background. We're gonna do some more investigation on that. We're turning our attention to the other stuff that's in the woods with them right now. Now, after we figure out what the hell is going on with that, we're gonna turn back and we'll start talking about the actual flesh and blood breathing monster Dogman. We need to figure out what the hell else is going on out there in the streets with it. So that's where we are right now. So tonight we are talking Bigfoot with William Lunsford, and I'm excited to spend a little time talking about Bigfoot. William, how are you doing this evening?
Dark, I'm doing great, buddy. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for everybody that's listening. Thank you to our armed service people and our public defenders that take care of us so that we can do what we do, man. I appreciate everybody for listening. Hopefully this will be a show that you'll enjoy, because I've got a lot of information. I've been doing this for 45 years. So hopefully I have a lot to share that can maybe make somebody else a Bigfoot researcher, or secure their belief in what they've seen. So very glad to be here. I appreciate you inviting me on here to be on here. Been looking forward to it.
Awesome sauce. Well, let's start here. I've discovered a couple of things since I've been in this kind of paranormal cryptid field for about 7 going on 8 years.
Right.
And I'm really a data-driven person. It's because my background is engineering. My brain is really organized. It's almost retarded how organized my brain works. But my sofa's messed up right now. It's flip side, like whatever. Anyway, I've discovered that there's a couple of things that happen that bring people into the field of cryptids in the paranormal field. Either they have an encounter when they're a child or a youngster, or they hear something from a parent and it happens at an early age where they take this interest, or as an adult they have an encounter or they find themselves in a situation that makes them very, very uncomfortable, and they start doing research. How did you get into the field of Bigfoot? Which side of it did you come in? Was it something that happened when you were a young man, or is it something that happened when you were an older man?
It's really funny, Dark, because it's kind of both. I grew up in a little place south of a town called Texarkana, Arkansas. It's one of the true twin cities. One side's in Texas, one side's in Arkansas. And we lived on a road called South State Line, where one side's actually in Texas, one side's actually in Arkansas. And we lived on a farm way out in the country. And so we would get reports every now and then of some things that were, it was about a 13-mile jaunt through the woods, and of some creatures that people would see on their way in from Texarkana downtown to towards where we lived at. And so you kind of became familiar with it. Every now and then where we were out there on the farm, we would hear some things that we just knew it wasn't anything normal. It wasn't coyotes, it wasn't bobcats. You would hear them, and like I said, it was almost as loud as, we had 2 railroad tracks that ran behind our house about a mile. The volume sometime would equal that of those. It would actually make your clothes quiver. At the end of this road was a river, Sulphur River, and my dad was an amateur boat builder, so we would go down there and to test the boats that he had made and do a little fishing. So one day we actually first encounter I remember is having we had 2 little, I called them monkeys because I didn't know any better than that. I said, "Dad, there's 2 monkeys down there on that sandbar." And he goes, "Yep." And he goes, "There's Mama up on the hill." Well, I kept looking. I couldn't never define her, but anyway, he differentiated between the size of monkeys and Mama, so I knew it was something that something that was there. My dad was a really smart man, and so then we had another place there where we had a friend that came. He delivered produce to our house down there, and you would hear him coming in his wagon. He had a mule that would pull his wagon. He lived about 3 miles away. One night he comes running up our driveway with that mule, and man, you could hear those wheels cracking and skipping those rocks. And he was banging on the door, and he's like, "Where's Mr. Bob? Where's Mr. Bob?" So we went and answered the door. I answered the door. My mother came to the door, and she said, "Well, Otis, how are you doing?" He goes, "I'm not too good." He said, "Where's Mr. Bob?" She said, "Right here." So when my dad come out, and he asked my dad if he still had his gun. And he said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Well, me and Otis had something some kind of booger jump up on the road there on the way down here." He said it took the mule's name was Roscoe. And he said it took Roscoe about a mile before he would quit running. And he said, "So I came down here." He said, "Y'all was the only ones I know to come down here." And so Dad got with him. He wanted my dad to get in the car and follow him with his gun and also with the headlights back to his place. So he did. And then, like I said, we would hear the things, but after that, things kind of dampened out. We moved back to town. And so when we moved back to town, didn't have anything. Then 1971, there was a creature down here. I live about anywhere from, depending on what part you go to, from 15 to 20 miles from a little town called Fouke, Arkansas. Fouke, Arkansas was the home of the legend of Boggy Creek, or the Fouke Monster. And that was that
Right.
creature that, if you've ever heard of that, it's really been one to help a lot of people get started. It really didn't help me get my start as much until a later date, but I'll touch on that in a sec. But so it ran across the road. Nearly 3 people in a vehicle nearly hit it running across Highway 71. Then it was seen by several other people. Then it actually came up around the house. They had some newlyweds in it, and it's for about 5 days to try to get in their house. It would reach their hands. It would reach its hand through the windows and things, and so it was picked up as a national byline because, like I said, Bowker is just a little town, very, very small population. And if it could happen there, it could happen anywhere because, most of us have aunts or uncles or somebody that has land out in the country. And the fact that it was happening there in a little town, it's not an insignificant town for sure, very, very fine people. But a town there that's kind of obscure, just kind of set between Texarkana and Shreveport, those are going to be your 2 points of interest you're going to see on the maps. And so the fact that it's happening there, so people really took an interest in it. And so then the Legend of Boggy Creek came out about 72 or 73. And so after that, that was about all you heard after the movie died down. And so, but I used to fish. We had some gravel pits that we used to fish down in the dark, and that was my thing. I really enjoyed fishing. My dad died when I was 12, but the places we had gone to, I still, whenever I got a chance to drive, would drive in there and fish. And so one day I have a chance encounter with one of these boogers. The first time, it was just where I was going down there, and as I walked down this gas line, and when I got back to where I was going to my vehicle, the thing screamed at me, and I could hear him pacing me along the edge of this gas line as I walked down through. And whenever he finally screamed, as I said, man, your clothes just shake like that, and so do your knees as soon as you hear it. And I knew it wasn't anything that I had ever been across before. We have panthers, we have bears, and we've got hogs, we've got bobcats, we got everything, but I've never really heard anything like that, except maybe, like I said, with those that would yell down there behind the train track. So I ran across the creek, got back to my vehicle. I look around, there's nothing there. I'm like, oh man, boy, you just dodged a bullet, whatever it was. So I went and bought me a Bowie knife, and I wasn't going to give up my fishing hole. I figured, well, man, it's just a one-time thing since I've never had that happen before. I come back probably a week and a half, 2 weeks later, going down the same little area there late in the afternoon, and I have a chance encounter there as I'm crossing this gas line again. I have 1 or 2 more gravel pits I can fish. It's about twilight, and so I'm trying to get down there right quick and fish those before I have to go back. Well, man, when I do, I look down this little roadway there. It was a logging road where they used to get the log and gravel out of there. And on the left-hand side of this road, there was a shadow over there squatted down, and I had never noticed this shadow. You get sometimes, familiarity brings contempt, and you just get to where you're just so used to something, you don't pay attention. But this was it was such a standout in the difference that I remember going down there, and I stopped, and I thought, man, there's something wrong here right quick. And I looked at that shadow, and the shadow wasn't moving. Like I said, solid black. And so I wanted to go a little further. And like I said, I had just that trepidation. No, you don't need to go down there. And finally, I thought to myself, boy, you're acting silly. You just need to go down there. Well, as I took about another step, something started to stand up. It started to move, and it started to stand up. And whenever it did, it had a limb in front of its face, and it was eating the leaves. It raises the limb to where the limb should go, and then the thing keeps standing up. So it gets to 7.5, 8 foot tall. It walks out in this logging road in front of me, and it starts teetering from side to side and staring at me. I mean, never took its gaze off of me, never makes a sound. But I started instantly thinking, first when I saw the hair on it, I thought, well, that's a bear. I'd seen bears before, and although that might not be a pleasant encounter, still I wasn't as worried about that. But then I knew it wasn't a bear. Then I thought, well, maybe that's a sloth, but Arkansas doesn't have any sloths, and I knew that was kind of a off the wall idea. I knew it wasn't anybody down there that was in some kind of ghillie suit or anything like that, because I was a good mile and a half from my vehicle, through the woods, through chiggers, through water. And when the thing's sitting there, and I'm like, I knew what it was. I didn't believe at that time. I did not believe. This was 1977. And like I said, about 3 years, 73, it's about 4 to 5 years after the Fountain Monster movie came out. And I did not believe. And since it had died down, everybody said, well, the thing has gone back into the woods, or it's not here anymore. But that day he was. So I stood there, and we stared at each other. Finally, he walks back to the same tree. He pulls the limb down that he was originally chewing on. He skinned the cat with his lips. He got all the leaves off and chewed for a second and walked in front of me. And then I thought, man, this is it. This is where you're going to die. And so as I sit right there, and again, he started teetering that back and forth and looking at me and very, very much posturing to me like, don't come down here. This is my area. And he didn't realize what little worry he had in me doing that for sure, because I wasn't going to take another step after that. Well, finally, as he sits there and he's staring at me, he goes to He takes a step on that right foot, but he pivots on the left. He takes 2 steps, and the third steps, he's into the woods. Well, I can't see him or hear him. But I'm wanting to run. I couldn't run before then. There was no way in the world. I tried my best. I don't know whether it was called from these creatures create something called infrasound, which can actually make you kind of catatonic there. And it was, and part of it was just plain fear, man. I was just frozen to the ground. There was nothing I could do. Finally, I got to thinking, man, if you're going to do something, you need to go. So I had some big gravel pits behind me. I was either going to dive into one of them and try to swim away. I was a very good swimmer, could swim underwater forever. And then I was also a miler at track. So I was going to try to either run my mile, one or two. So I take off finally running, and instead of jumping into the pit, I just decided to try to outrun him. And so he didn't come towards me. Never saw him again. But I run back there. I get back to the creek that I had crossed down there that I had to wade through. I actually jumped over it like a steeplechase, ran up the side of the bank, ran across this open field. I thought, man, he'll catch me here. There's nowhere I can hide. There's nothing I can do. He doesn't get to another little about 100-yard stretch there. There's nothing, just canopy of trees just like this. And it is so dark. My man, he'll get me right here. Well, he didn't. I got down there to the gate, threw my stuff over the gate. I dove through the gate, got my key in my door, and started my vehicle. And I look out there, and there's my fishing tackle. And I'm like, oh gosh, man! Like I said, I was a poor kid, man. That not only was that my way of entertainment, but like I said, I wasn't rich enough to afford another real nice rod and reel like that, and it had been given to somebody that was really, really special to me at the time, and so it had a lot of sentimental value. So I looked around. I pulled up about 3 or 4 feet with that vehicle with my car. I had a Datsun B210 hatchback. Tossed that stuff into the passenger side, and including my Bowie knife. Whenever I saw him, I actually pulled my Bowie knife out and waved at him. I'm like, man, if this is going to happen, which was really stupid. But like I said, you're 17 and bulletproof. That's about the only thing you can think of. But anyway, I get in my vehicle. I drive back home. I take inventory, man. I mean, I am crying, water all over my face. I'm dirty. I'm shaking. I'm hyperventilating. I can't hardly, get a cognizant thought except that if he steps out in front of me, I'm fixing to wreck this car. Well, it didn't, and I got back to Texarkana, which was probably at that time, about a 12 to 13 mile jaunt. I walk inside, man. I jump down in one of my recliners, and my mom comes in there and, make small talk. She says, "What is wrong with you?" And I said, "Mom, I saw the fountain monster." And she kind of just giggled a little bit, and she said, "The fountain monster?" I said, "Mama, I saw the fountain monster." Well, my mama, man, I wasn't no lying kid, I was raised in a good Christian home. I didn't believe in monsters. I didn't believe in telling lies, and I'm sitting there telling her what's happening. And she realized by the way that I'm behaving that I had actually seen what I said. She said, "Well, son, I believe you, but I want you to know I don't think you ought to tell a whole lot of people." And so I took her advice except for 2 people. And when I did, they both laughed me to scorn. They said, "Man, I know you saw something. This is one of the worst sentences I ever hear. I know you saw something, but you didn't see no fountain monster." Yes, Dark, I did. And I knew what I saw. I ran it time and time and time through my mind. There's a video loop and what I saw. So I knew what I had saw. And so anyway, so I didn't tell anybody after that. And it went for a long time. And like I said, I was a senior in high school. Then about 8 years later, there's a place there called Mercer Bio. And Mercer is world famous for having Bigfoot encounters. It's right there off of the Sulphur River. And so I was down there one day with my nephew. I had a new boat. Didn't know how long it would take to get back. So I was about 30 minutes after dark. And we got back there and pulled the boat onto the ramp, went to get my truck, pulled it onto the boat ramp. We're just having a good time. My nephew was 8 years old. We'd had a ball. We'd caught a lot of fish, and he caught a lot of fish. That was really important to me for him to have that good time and to instill that kind of a lifestyle in him. And then all of a sudden, over in the corner, this thing stands up, and it's over in the corner of the parking lot. It stands up and takes off running through the woods. Well, man, my nephew just freaks out, and I did too, because I was really more worried. I was worried for me, but I was more worried for him being 8 years old. And I said, "Get in the truck." He goes, "What?" I said, "Get in the truck." "What?" I said, "Get in the truck." So he gets in the truck. I go around. I don't even tie my boat down, man. I just take off, and there's a road about a mile away up there. And so I got to that road. I got down. I tied my boat down. He goes, "You're not getting out, are you?" And I said, "I'll be fine, Chris." I said, "Just stay in." So after both those encounters, I tried each time to go and do find as much information as I could, but there wasn't a whole lot back in 1977 with my first encounter. Back in 1985, there was a little bit more. We'd already, 77, we'd had the Patterson-Gimlin film, and we'd had the stuff there in the California out there with the Jerry Crew and all that. We'd actually named it there where they were building those roads, but there just wasn't that much more. Again, I remember one. I remember not Dennis the Menace. There was a show called The Creature with the Big Feet. I went back and looked that up. That came out in 1963. So there was something there that they based that on also. But I just thought all that was, to promote Hollywood. But I realized these things are real, and I had to learn something about it. So I did. I became uh, a very, very good student. I wanted to know about them. I knew if I was going to have an encounter, I wanted to have something to do about it. I wanted to have something to do with it, to know what to do, what not to do. And as you know, once you see one, man, there is a kind of a need inside you that where I've got to see one again. I've got to see one again. I've got to reaffirm what I know I've already seen, even though that's the second time I had seen them. So again, I studied like that. The lady I married, I knew at some time. I married in 1981 there, and so I knew I had to share with her and her parents that I had actually seen the Fountain Monster, and so. I expected her dad to say, well, son, that's nice. So go ahead and pick up your stuff and leave my house and don't come back. But instead, I got the story of the lady across the road from them who had a garden party, and they were out in her front yard having a garden party. And there was a pasture right there to the south of her house. They had a fence line. Well, one day during her garden party, one of these things starts walking down her fence line, and it's one of the big rusty red color, and it sits there and it's walking. It stares at her about like it did me. It didn't stop to teeter, but it continued to just giant step through there. And she tried to keep the lady's attention on her. It got to the fence. It stepped across, went across where my in-laws were building the house at the time. And so they didn't ridicule me, but I knew right then with somebody with that kind of background, that was the girl I was going to marry. So I did. But and I mean, it's crazy, but the fact that when I started telling people, but that it meant so much that they didn't ridicule me. And so when I told them, but I didn't make a believer out of it. She knew, as the statement I said, I hated. I know you saw something, but you didn't see the Fountain Monster. And her dad's a very practical man. He's a very good man, Christian-minded man, and he wouldn't belittle me as that, but he said, I just can't believe there's anything like that. He said, you saw something. He said, but you didn't see the Fountain Monster. After 30 years with her, I made a believer. 33 years of him, I made a believer out of him. Actually, made a knower, not a believer, out of both of them right there. And so that's how I got started. Man, just like I said, by an accidental encounter that it had more to do with than I did. And as well as the second one there, I was in the right place at the right time down there on Mercer Bio. And then after that, I started spending a lot of time looking for it because I had to know, I had to, quote, scratch that itch, unquote, that I had to see another one again. And so I was a UPS man. I would ask people in the different areas and stuff like that, and some would ridicule me, and some would not. And some would actually volunteer information. And again, I tell people one of the best lines I had, I would tell people, well, Bigfoot doesn't live out here. It's because it's too far for him to walk. Well, a lot of people would laugh and they'd say, yeah. But then sometimes you get somebody that say, well, if you think that, you need to be here about dark. And I told the one lady there when she said that, I said, well, I'm afraid of the dark. And she goes, well, you should be. I'm like, oh, I got to know more, man. So again, my favorite Martian antenna went up. And I said, tell me more. So she told me a little bit more about it. And so, but I never got a chance to go back down there. She passed away. Never got a chance to go back down there. But the fact that as old and wise as she was, and that she was a believer or a knower, well, I knew right then. And so I also had the good fortune to become a UPS man down in Fouke, not too far from where I'd had my original encounter. And if you know the background story of the Fountain Monster, there were people camping in their pastures. They were camping in their front yard. They were cutting their fences, going into the woods and everything else like that. And those people really got kind of a raw deal on that thing, but they handled it with class. There's some very classy people, and they still get made fun every now and then. But with that right there, I was down there, and I would go up to somebody delivering to their house, and I'd say, "Man, you ever seen the creature?" And they'd all just laugh. "You ain't a monkey chaser, are you?" And I'd laugh. No, I'm not. But I said, I just wonder, Well, then there about 2 or 3 times later, after being to their house, I said, "You remember you asked me the first time you was down here if I'd ever seen the creature?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, I have." And they said, "We just want to make sure you wasn't going to make fun of us because we certainly had a lot of that." So they would tell me their story. And so, but I said, "Well, man, why didn't you tell me the first time?" I said, "I wasn't going to make fun of you." They said, "Well, that's one thing we wanted to see, because we took a lot of ridicule." But, they also said this. They said, it's a normal way of life for a lot of us down here. We know it's real. We see it all the time. It's just not a big thing. And they said it's not something that we want to go up and try to hug like a teddy bear. Said, but we accept it as being part of our nature around here. And so that was really cool. And then I said I went up towards the Ouachita Mountains and the Ozark Mountains. I started picking up stories up there. I thought, well, man, these things are not just here in Texarkana. Then I went down towards Louisiana down there, and that's probably 40 miles. Started picking up the stories towards Louisiana. I went a UPS route about 70 miles to the west towards Dallas. I picked up stories there. Same way, again, going east over towards Magnolia and El Dorado, Arkansas. And I'm like, man, these things are everywhere. So I really knew then that I had to really do some more studying. And I kept a little notebook there of the things that people told me, and I was just fascinated. I never, during that time, I never listened to any podcasts or anything because, Doc, I wanted my research to be my own. I didn't want to be influenced by what somebody else had said, and so
That makes sense.
yeah, there's there's a lot of false narratives of people saying what Bigfoot does and what they don't. Now, I'm not saying I've seen everything. I generally try not to comment on things that I have not seen and have not experienced. Just because I have not experienced them doesn't mean it's not true and that other people have not. But I wanted my research to be my own. So once I came across something, I could check that off as being, yep, classic Bigfoot behavior. Yes, check. A classic Bigfoot habitat. And so I did. And so that really helped me a lot too, because like I said, I knew what I had found. And once the people would tell me, I'm like, wow, that's happened to me, or that happened to Jane over here in Douglasville, Texas, the very same thing. So that's kind of how I got started. And man, I've been really been at it. The last 7 or 8 years have been just incredible. I don't know whether the creatures' numbers are increasing, which I think they are, but I don't know if that's the reason, or whether I'm just a better researcher, or whether or not I have about 6 different areas I go to, but 2 are really my main areas. And I'm convinced that in 2 of these areas, the beings know me, or recognize me, or recognize my truck, and so they tend to let themselves be seen more than what they would otherwise. So I've been getting a lot of sightings. I have 5 good research partners there. I've got a man named Daniel Becker who is from Anchorage, Alaska. He's just recently gotten into it. Very, very sharp man, thinks outside the box, can run things by him. I have a friend named Shannon Cruz who actually has him on his land, who actually had one up there staring at him while he was up in his deer stand one morning, screamed at him, and he screamed back. It took off. He did too. But he called me that afternoon, and so he says, these things are real. And I said, yeah. He was talking to a friend of mine on the internet there, and so he said, he asked my friend Jody Raphael. He said, Jody, you ever seen one? Jody said, no, but Will has. So he called me and he said, man, could I private message you? And I said, sure. So he did, and he told me what had happened. Oh man, I thought he'd never asked, but finally he said, would you be willing to come here and take a look? Shoot, man, I was like the Roadrunner cartoon, man. The highway curled up behind my truck, So I got up there that afternoon within 30 minutes and listened to his story. And he had a little side-by-side mule vehicle. We drove there, and sure enough, man, 10 minutes into it, we find a track right there in the middle of some deer feed that he had put out there. And we get on the back area of his land, and then we've got a couple of them that are back there hooting at us. And as you know, they do hoot, they do howl. And then went to another spot. Then we get a couple of tree knocks. Then we go back to his house for a little bit. We go back out and we sit in the deer stand, and then about dark, the same thing happens. So he and I become good friends. He's given me, him and his folks have been really generous to let me have the free reign of their place to come research as I will. And he's gotten to see the creature twice more there. Man, we have found tracks. We've gotten great pictures down there. We've had more encounters. I haven't had the visual down there again yet, but he has. But and actually, his own family, like the Bible says, prophets not without honor except in his own country. Well, his family kind of laughed at him too, until his sister walked outside one morning. There's one standing across the garden. So people down there, they realize it, and with him, he's a great partner. Randy Crawford, boy, Randy's got a very good analytical mind. Like I said, my wife and my son actually research with me. My son is a dentist, so he's very, 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 very smart, and I say that proudly. Not with any kind of way to brag or anything, but just that he's a very sharp young man. Very proud of him. And my wife, man, she's got Ellie Mae syndrome. She walks through the woods, and these things just come to the edge, And then so I have another man named Stephen Hill. Stephen has been a friend of mine for 30-something years. We started researching. First 2 nights we went out, we saw 3 each night. We actually got a video of a mama and 2 babies the first night we went out. And so we got that for about 20 minutes. And the way we found that was my son was a preacher in a little town in northern Arkansas. So we were driving home, and it was after daylight saving time. Well, I see something walking down the road. I said, Reese, watch out. There's a hitchhiker there. Don't let him throw a bottle of rock through there and hit you. And he's on his phone naturally. And so he just looks up, he danced back down. All of a sudden, when I get up to this thing, it turns around and it's a Bigfoot. I said, Reese, it's a Bigfoot. And I slammed on the brakes. It ran across and then it went into these woods there. Well, as so I know there's a place I always wanted to check out. Well, Stephen, when he lived up there, Stephen goes, man, I got a place we can run right quick. I said, okay. Man, coincidentally, we go to the same place. And I said, oh, man, I said, this could be good. Well, it was. It's that very first night. So we got a mama and two babies that night on video. And then I had another one there on February the 9th of that year. And then, man, then it's gone crazy. We put out game cams, and man, during the month of March in 2019, it was incredible how many pictures we were getting. And as to this day, I mean, getting a bunch of them on the game cams. I've gotten some now with my blasted cell phone. My wife has gotten a couple with her Canon AE1 camera. And so, like I said, and this year was the strangest because Daniel, my friend, came down from Alaska. Last year, he came down in October, which is one of the best months for researching Bigfoot. Down here, man, like I said, the deer hunters come out. They wound the deer. The Bigfoot is basically, nature's cleanup service. They do that, and they'll take care of those things. But me and Daniel were down there, and the first time, like I said, we both got COVID. We didn't get to research. Well, he came back this time in April. And, man, we had a very, very effective series of trips. We got a picture of one that's about a 10.5 footer. And it's got a little hand across its chest, like one is holding on to it from behind. Very, very great shot. That's one of the best camera shots that we have. And he works for the government, so he had a little better camera than I did. So I took the gun because we also have rattlesnakes and copperheads and cottonmouths down here. And so I was going to try to keep us safe, and hogs. Man, I'm more worried about hogs than I am really any of those other creatures. Mm-hmm. And so I'm doing the safety deal. And so I said, Daniel, we hear some noise several times there. I said, I said, start taking you some pictures here along the edge of these woods. So we're on a logging road that's in the middle. And I said, take it kind of grid style. So he takes one about here. He goes over 10 foot. And sure enough, we get up there a little bit ways and we start looking. And sure enough, there's this 10.5 foot Bigfoot standing right there. So to his credit, he had already lined up a photographer in Anchorage, Alaska, where he's from, to send these pictures to. So he sends it to her. She sends it through some filters, and it draws out, looks like a little laser picture of the outline of what's there. Well, he also sends it to a man named L.A. Marzulli. And Marzulli is well known in the public speaker deal. I think he does more Nephilim and angels and things like that. But right. He gave it a glowing review, saying there's no doubt in my mind it's a real. We're still there in the field, and we got this thing sitting there looking at when he's getting feedback back from the girl who has the photography shop, and also from Marzulli. So that was really great. I went back then later on to check that to check that area. I took a meter stick with me, and it was 10.5 foot tall. I actually saw another in one group there. There was 5 in one group. Two of them were in a tree. The other 3 were down there in the front. Then I got another one over in a brush top that was sitting there looking at me. I was able to get his picture with my cell phone. So that was really, really a good April for us. So I had one more sighting there in May that was just he was there, and then he took off. Didn't even get a chance to hardly get my cell phone up. It's hard to do. People say, well, why can't you get pictures? Man, try this with your dog. When your dog, say, grabs his food bowl, starts running across the yard, bouncing around, get your cell phone out, line up the shot, get it focused in, and take a picture before he ever drops the bowl. You can't hardly do that. And that's about the same thing with Bigfoot, because they're not, as a rule, they're not going to sit there like, like you're doing a portrait and let them look at you. They're going to move. They have a need to remain unseen, except I think after you've been there for a while, like we have, because they do make themselves known when we're there. Now they'll actually walk to the edge of the woods. My wife can do a call. I said if they have little ones, they'll actually pull the little ones up to look. I've got a camera that sends pictures to my cell phone while I'm there in bed, and all of a sudden it goes off. And then you'll get it, and there's a picture of Bigfoot standing in front of my camera right there. It's become such a joke between me and my wife. As soon as my camera goes off, she flies on top of me like she's doing a body slam, like
trying to see what it is, huh?
Yeah, exactly right. Like Macho Man Randy Savage. She grabs it and looks at it, and she's gotten where she's very good. So
let me ask you this question.
Sure.
I'm gonna bring you back a little bit to a couple of things you said.
Go right ahead.
The first thing I'm gonna talk to you from a Christian perspective, a man who believes in Jesus Christ, a man who believes in God, and both of us being that. And this is more of a personal thing, but it's gonna play out through this interview because I'm struggling with this. As a man of God, how do you feel about the pursuit of these things? How do you balance that in your mind and in your heart? Because it seems to me like there's something weird with this whole scenario and the whole situation of Bigfoot and other cryptids. I've been
It,
struggling with that recently, and it's because it's like at some point in time, you like for example, you guys have photos, you have videos, you have
yep.
the information, you know it's real, you can prove it's real.
Yes, sir.
Like I'm trying to figure out where I draw a line in the sand. You know what I'm saying? Have you ever thought about that?
I have. And I'll tell you what, since I have been doing this, like I said, Stephen is my more often research partner than not. And he and I have been down there more often than not in the dark and everything. Man, we got some pictures, some things that I wasn't ready to accept. Uh, there's things out there, like I said, it's not just Bigfoot. I know people say, well, you're crazy for believing in Bigfoot. Well, let me tell you what, there's other things out there too. We get some pictures of stuff every now and then that flat scare me to death, man. And I'm 6'2" and or 6'1" now. So I'm 6'1", 270 pounds, and Steven's probably 6'3" or 6'4", about 360. And we see things there that, man, now we as a rule just don't go down there by ourselves very much anymore, because if we have an encounter that's either aggressive or that we can't understand, realize how quick something can turn bad. But as a Christian, as I said, I was raised in a godly home there, and anything we don't understand, we tend to frame as monsters. And that's kind of what they did with the Fouke monster. Well, what I've
Right.
learned about Bigfoot is these jokers are familial. They tend to run in family groups. They tend to tend to get some of the same tracks every year from the different groups and stuff like that. They're very, very good parents. And as I said, they tend to have a soft side to them, to where they could kill us anytime they wanted to. They could catch us anytime they wanted to. And so far, I've only had 2 encounters that have been aggressive. I would have had a third one, but I was wise enough to leave. But but I think God put them here. Everything He put here, He put for us to understand. And people say, well, how come nobody's ever seen one? They say, well, how come there's no pictures? Dark, I've got a bunch of pictures, and people say, well, why don't you show them? I show them to a lot of people, the ones who show reverence and respect to the creature, not to me. I couldn't care less about myself, but I'm not going to sit there and show it to somebody who wants to sit there and try to make fun of somebody or somebody else who's being creepy. That's just not what. But I've sent my pictures all over this country, so all of these United States, and some
Yes, yes, yes.
but I keep my
If you
mind.
want to hear the rest of this interview, go to imdogwaters.com and become a member today, where you will find many more interviews just like this. imdogwaters.com. Become a member today.